Sheriff Harrold.
All right, well, thank you very much, appreciate it, and just want to say in advance that I appreciate that you're here tonight. I've been doing a bunch of these around the county, and I really sincerely appreciate folks who come out of their house and spend a little bit of time to hear, really what's going on in their community, and in a county that's got just shy of 400,000 folks in it. I wish that lots more would do it, but I'm preaching to the choir because you're here to hear about it, so appreciate that. Yeah, so I had the privilege of being your sheriff. I've been a part of the sheriff's office for a little over 30 years, started as a cadet back when I was in high school, hired right after I turned 21 as a deputy, and have had the joy of doing almost every job we have in the office, and have been your sheriff for just shy of 4 years now. We're here to talk about the Lane County Jail and the jail levy. 36 counties in Oregon, every county is required to have a sheriff, every sheriff is required to run a jail. And so Lane County has had a jail ever since they've had a sheriff. Lane County also historically was able to provide robust government services on timber receipts. And I think most folks in this room probably know that. 54% federal forest land, Lane County, nearly the size of Connecticut. Our property tax rate for county government services is about $28 per thousand. It's one of the lowest in the state. Lane County didn't need to collect a lot of property taxes because they provided a great government service with timber receipts in the 70s. And then when timber receipts started to go away, there had to be some changes to services. The federal government initially started sending money to counties that were timber reliant counties when the timber receipts started to go away. And initially those monies were in excess of $50 million. As you can see, those drastically were reduced over time. And now it's sort of touch and go whether the program exists or not. They still talk about it in Congress at the federal level, but it certainly doesn't have the level of support that it did in the early part of the 2000s. So because of that tailing off of federal payments, from 2008 to 2012, Lane County had significant reductions across county services. But specific to the sheriff's office, we cut 200 positions out of the sheriff's office and we laid off 100 people. It was pretty decimating to the office, and in particular to the Lane County Jail. We reduced this down to 125 beds, and it required us to start forced releasing folks out of jail. I use a couple terms interchangeably: forced release, capacity-based release. We love our acronyms, so sometimes we call those CBRs, capacity-based release. What those releases are releases where the court has said, "Hey, sheriff, we want you to hang on to that person." But we didn't have enough room, so we were forced to release them. It's different than a pretrial release. Pretrial releases happen every day under the jurisdiction of the court. We have a pretrial services office in the Lane County Jail, which is staffed by folks who don't work for the sheriff, they work for the Oregon Judicial. We're actually a leader in the state. We've had that in Lane County for decades. The state legislature really has been looking more and more at pretrial release, and they're really trying to direct the whole state to have a system like we have in Lane County, where there are court release officers in the jail. Everybody that gets booked in gets reviewed. The folks that are in pretrial services make a release decision based on a criteria given to them both by the state, well, primarily by the state. We use a risk assessment tool that's validated by the University of Oregon from time to time, and they use that to determine should this individual be released pretrial or should they stay in custody. And there's different levels of that. Excuse me. It could be that the pretrial release officer decides they should stay at least to see the judge for their first appearance. So got booked in at 7 p.m. at night. Court release officer takes a look at them and says, here's where they're at on the risk assessment tool. I think we'll keep them here until 1 o'clock tomorrow when they have arraignment. They have arraignment in front of the judge, then they get reevaluated in the pretrial release. So those are all very structured releases, and there's a variety of ways to do pretrial release where the court might require them to check in once a week by phone or in person. They might require them to wear an electronic monitor. All of that is different from a capacity-based release. Capacity-based release, the court said, hang on to them, we don't have room, we release them. None of those connections are required to check in. Not wearing. So down to 125 beds, we were doing capacity-based releases on a regular basis. I'm feeling like I'm going to try and get through my PowerPoint a little faster than normal. So we're doing a lot of capacity-based releases, including Measure 11 in pretrial felony offenders. By statute, we're supposed to hold on to Measure 11 in pretrial offenders, serious violent felony offenders. But again, we didn't have room. As a reminder, Measure 11, mid-90s, citizen petition, mandatory sentences on serious violent felonies. And I actually have a slide that lists them. So some of our Measure 11 crimes: assault 1 and 2, manslaughter, murder, robbery, rape, 6. And then you can see how many Measure 11 offenders we had in our custody per calendar year. So we were releasing quite a few of those. Tom Turner was sheriff in 2012. We had Mr. Wilders and I were talking about this. Lake County had tried 12 or 13 times to pass a funding measure, none of them had passed. Tom Turner went out and had a really robust conversation with the community about the state of the jail at 125 beds. And what he did was that he came back and worked with the county to write the measure based on what he heard from the community. Because he asked the community, what level of service do you want to see, and what do you want to do? So the levy that was written in 2013 was based on what he heard from the community, and it promised a minimum of 255 beds in the adult jail. It promised 8 detention beds in youth services and 8 treatment beds in youth services. And it promised an annual external audit that would be presented to the Board of County Commissioners and the elected sheriff in a public forum. Because one of the things that he heard from the voters were that they didn't trust that the money, if it passed, would actually be spent the way the county was saying it would. So that external audit was a piece of the promise of 2013. The levy did pass in 2013, 54% of the voters. We've had that external audit ever since 2013. Every year, they've confirmed we're providing exactly what we said we would. We have not had the capacity-based release a single Measure 11 or violent felony offender since the levy passed. We did still have to capacity-based release offenders, but none of the violent felonies were Measure 11. This slide just shows you again, 50% of the detention beds are for youth services funded with the levy. Over 50% of their treatment beds are funded with the levy. Overall, the levy provides 35% of the operational funding for youth services. The levy passed in 2013. We had laid off 100 people. To Tom Turner's credit, he invited sheriffs from around the state to come to our office and hire staff that he knew he had to lay off. We want to make sure everybody. And I respect him a lot. It's also really hard for the folks that aren't getting laid off. You know, there's survivor guilt, and it's hard to watch your family members getting hired to move up to the metro area. But they all got jobs, and that was good. They didn't provide for the families. The levy passed. We needed employees. They were working. So we were recruiting and hiring and training new folks. June 30th of 12, we had 125 beds. July 1, we had 256 beds. And we promised the voters that if it passes, we'll have a minimum of 5 beds. Well, we did that on the backs of the folks that were still working, because we didn't have a bunch of employees to make that happen. They worked really, really long hours so we could make good on our promise. And then we said, hey, folks who have survivor's guilt and are working long hours, we also need you to train all these new people. Over time, we were successful at recruiting and training, and so we were able to continue to open more beds. So we made good on the promise right away. Eventually, we were able to hire enough staff that today we're operating 367 beds. We're operating all of the beds available. Just as a reminder, you know, it's 10 years ago that the levy first passed, and when we did a little bit of polling before this renewal, they made sure I knew, hey, if you think the voters remember that, they don't. It was 10 years ago. People don't remember that the registered was putting the pictures on this page. And so they said, if you do a robust information campaign, then folks will remember, but if you just sit back and think they will. So that's why I told Tom to sign me up as many times as he possibly could to talk about this. And he did a good job, because I have been busy. 52% of our corrections division is paid for with the levy. 52% is the overall umbrella of corrections. That includes things like sheriff's work crew, where you drive by and you see folks out picking up litter. That includes the electronic monitoring that I mentioned. It includes community service. We have a deputy who spends their full time coordinating with nonprofits, so that when folks get sentenced to local jail time, they can maybe serve that time by working for a nonprofit and getting credit for their justice. So, and I need to differentiate when we talk about sentenced offenders. Most folks, if they get sentenced on a felony for years, we're transporting them to the prison system, right? So the jail is not full of sentenced offenders. Occasionally, on a low-level property crime felony or a misdemeanor, somebody might get sentenced to local jail. We probably have I don't know, roughly 200 sentence defenders in our system right now. But what happens is that they show up in a certain court and the judge says, okay, you're sentenced to 20 days in the Lane County Jail and victim restitution and 2 years of probation. Used to be, he would call a deputy and a deputy would come up and put handcuffs on that person and take him to jail. We haven't done that for years. Most of the time now, the judge says, that's your sentence. Within the next 3 days, report over to the Lane County Jail at the DOMC, Defendant Offender Management Center. Report over there for your sentence. And so they check in, we interview them. Do you have a job? What kind of connection do you have to the community? Sign you up for sheriff's work crew. You've got 20 days to serve. You want to do that 20 days in a row. You want to do it 1 day a week in the next 20 weeks. How do you want to serve this? This community service appropriate for this. So today, actually inside the jail, we have 39 citizens. Those 39 probably will offer 5, 6, or 7 tries at alternative programs, and they just wouldn't show up. And so at some point, our folks said, okay, you need to get your sentence served. We'll go ahead and occupy a jail. But Lane County, for the longest time, we've really been strategic and prioritized our limited jail. And so we don't typically occupy sentence. I get an email daily at 11 a.m. that tells me who is in your Lane County Jail. So today at 11 o'clock, we had 17 people in custody for murder charges. We had 70 folks in custody for Measure 11 charges outside of the movement. And again, Measure 11, that's rape 1, sex abuse 1, sodomy 1, robbery 1, assault 1. We had 32 folks in custody for violent felonies outside of Measure 11. So Measure 11 are the worst of the violent felonies, but there are violent felonies that aren't part of Measure 11. As an example, rape 1 is a Measure 11 violent felony. Attempted rape 1 is a violent felony that is not a Measure 11. So 39 folks in custody that were, or 32 folks in custody for violent felonies outside of Measure 11. We had 29 folks in custody for violent misdemeanors, and I can almost promise you that all of those are domestic violence. So domestic violence assault typically is a misdemeanor the first time. There are a number of things that can turn a domestic violence assault into a felony. So if it met one of the factors for it to be a felony, it would bump up into the violent felony category. But the 29 that are in custody for violent misdemeanor would be domestic violence misdemeanors. Mentioned sentence defenders, and we have 13 folks who are in custody pending a sanction. That means they're under supervision by a parole or probation officer. Probation officer's been walking alongside them and keeps telling them, you know, you're not actually doing what I've asked you to do. So they might bring them to jail to sanction them to say, you know, where they immediately got to. We've got a couple people in custody for treatment court. The treatment courts occasionally, as they're walking alongside someone trying to get them out of drug addiction. Typically, we also have a veterans treatment court and a mental health treatment court. They will use jail as a sanction, sort of an attention getter to get some feedback. And then we have 13 folks in custody that are somewhere in the fitness to proceed revolving situation. I don't think it's any secret that we have a mental health crisis in our community, in our state, and frankly in our nation. Mental health resources across the country have been significantly lacking for a couple of decades, certainly during my career. And so, unfortunately, what I see, you know, I think that probably once upon a time, it was too easy to have your loved one committed to the state hospital. But now it's nearly impossible. And so what we see more often than not is folks are calling us for help because they have a loved one headed down a bad path and there's no help. Because right now in Oregon, more or less legally, the idea is they have the right to be ill and not be ill. Well, unfortunately, everybody in the room would be able to look and say that person is not able to make good decisions for themselves right now. But legally, we can do that. And so what happens is families end up throwing their hands in the air and saying, well, maybe they'll get arrested and then they'll be. Well, the criminal justice system is not the best place to deal with criminals for sure. And unfortunately, unfortunately, county jails across the state, across the country are the catch basin of folks who are struggling with mental health crisis. Oftentimes that goes hand in hand with drug addiction crisis. Somebody gets arrested, let's say their behavior is causing a disruption, voluntary compliance is sought but not granted, and so someone calls the police, like, help solve this problem for me, please. Currently, the police have two options. They can say, I don't think this person's capable of taking good care of themselves. I think they may be a danger to themselves. So I'm going to take them to the University District Hospital to the UL. The dilemma is that if they take them there, they, the police officer will likely have to stay there with them for quite a long period of time. And also likely that person will be discharged within hours. And so what the police officer learns is that if they instead say, you've been asked to leave and you refuse, that's trespass, they can take you to jail. They at least know that they will have solved that problem for the rest of their shift. And so that is more likely what happens. In American jurisprudence, if you're not mentally capable of assisting in your own defense, you don't go through the criminal justice system. We don't agree that you should. And so what happens is they have their first appearance in front of the judge. The folks that are in the courtroom, the judge, both lawyers, they say, we're not sure that this person is mentally capable of assisting in their own defense. So the judge orders what's called a fitness to proceed evaluation. By law, when the judge orders one of those, the sheriff, the judge's order says, the sheriff, you shall deliver them to the state hospital. And by law, we're supposed to deliver them within 7 days. Unfortunately, we call the state hospital and say, we've got this judge's order, and the state hospital says, as soon as we could possibly see you as in 4 weeks. So people sit in jail waiting for a fitness to proceed because our state is not adequately resourcing. Some of the things that we've done in our jail to combat that is the fact that we've reorganized the way some of our folks work. We have 2 sergeants who full-time take a look at who's in custody, particularly the mental health folks who are struggling with mental health. If they're waiting for a fitness to proceed, and they're capable of sitting in front of technology, we'll use an evaluator that's sitting in an office at the floor to get them that fitness to proceed rather than waiting until the state hospital can see them. And there's folks sitting in offices locally also being used. So we try to facilitate that as quickly as we can. You can Google Oregon State Hospital. There's court cases in federal court and state court regarding how all of this is working. But I'll tell you a quick story. There's a federal court decision called the Mossman decision that said, hey, state hospital, every county jail has people waiting to get in here for fitness to proceed. The folks that you have currently need to be discharged so that you can get the people on the waiting list. Well, that's not necessarily a great solution. That just resets really the whole revolving door. We had an individual in fall of 2020, right when the Holiday Farm Fire was going, out on Butler Road out of Elmira. There was a utility crew out trenching I think they were installing broadband. Individual walked up and told them to stop installing surveillance equipment, and if they didn't, he was going to shoot them. That caused them alarm. They went down the road. They called us, hey, we've got a job. We're supposed to be trenching. This individual threatened us. So deputies go out there to knock on his door. Hey, what's going on? He starts shooting at him with an AK-47, which, by the way, goes through doors. And over the course of the next 4 or 5 hours, he fired over 100 rounds. We ended up responding. I was at a command post less than a mile away, listening to shots being fired and wondering how my folks are doing. It's not a good feeling. By frankly a miracle, he ultimately surrendered. We have a piece of armored equipment that tore down the garage door. He was inside of the garage door, and eventually he laid down his rifle and walked out. No one was injured. He was taken into custody for attempted assault 1. He was transported up to the state hospital for fitness to proceed. When the federal court order said, hey, state hospital, you've got all these people waiting, he was sent back to the jail. The state hospital said he's still not fit to proceed. He gets sent back to the jail. He goes in front of a judge. The judge hears the state hospital and says he's not fit to proceed. Criminal charges are dropped. He's released from jail. I don't know when the next time deputy's going to have to go to but that's not a good system, and it needs fixed, and ultimately the state has to help us out. That's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about Tulane County Jail, but it all comes together. What I do want to tell you is that I've been very fortunate that I inherited a legacy from folks that went before me to think differently about who's in our custody, because the population of our jail today is different than I was looking in there in 1995. And initially, as I was coming up along behind Sheriff's Tom Turner and Byron Trapp and participating in the Oregon State Sheriff's Association, I was watching as all of the sheriffs really there was this level of frustration. Became a sheriff, you never planned on running a mental hospital. And so there's kind of this isn't my job attitude. And then I watched as everybody recognized, it's not up to the sheriff who's in jail. It's up to the courts. And the reality is, these folks are in jail. And we do have a statutory charge to take care of the people that are in our custody. And so we had to start thinking differently about it. Very proud of this program. Our folks went and presented at a conference in Denver, national conference, that we started thinking differently about some of these things. A very traditional corrections approach is, if your behavior is bad, you stay locked in your cell more until your behavior improves. When your behavior improves, you come out more, you get more access to the phone and more access to books and more access to other privileges. That's still an appropriate method for some of the folks in our custody. But what we started doing was taking a look. We have a multidisciplinary team made up of mental health specialists, medical, and deputy sheriffs. And they specifically look at who's in our custody, and they make an individual management plan for some of these folks. We've invested in 5 mental health specialists at Plain County Jail. We're the only county jail in the state that has 5 mental health specialists in staff. And what they do is they identify some of these folks that, oftentimes these folks are in and out of custody. We become familiar with them. And they identify these folks and they say, rather than waiting for their behavior to improve and then doing something, why don't we get them plugged into this program? We'll bring them out as a group. We'll have them engage with the mental health specialists. We'll have them engage in some programming, maybe behavior will improve. And we've been doing it for a few years. We started with 10 beds. We've expanded it to 56 beds for men. And I don't remember how many beds we have available for women to participate in the program. And I can tell you that we are absolutely seeing better behavior. Now, when we first started doing it, the deputies have been working in the jail for a long time. Like I said, this is a traditional corrections approach. The deputies are saying, really? That person who fights with us every time they're in custody, we're going to move on to the 3rd floor and put them in this program and bring them out with other people all the time. Like, deputies weren't thinking this was a very good idea. And trust us, we're going to try this. And now I take folks on the jail tour, and deputies who've been working in the jail for 20 years will say stuff like, you wouldn't believe who was leading group the other day. And they'll say the name, and it's somebody we recognize because of this past history. But by engaging them in this programming, we are absolutely seeing better behavior. Now, we're also hoping that we're giving them some skills, skills that you and I probably hopefully already have: confrontation avoidance and conflict resolution. We hope that we're giving them some skills so that they can avoid coming back. I can't tell you that the data says that that's true, but I can tell you that we are experiencing better behavior while they're in our custody, which is our primary concern. I mentioned the sergeants that we've assigned to take a look and try to plan for the folks that are in our custody when they're in a mental health crisis. An example of that is the state hospital has somebody, and we know they're coming back to us. They're coming back to us in 2 days. The sergeant's going to make a plan for when they come back into our custody. Which housing area will they be housed in? Which group might they be part of, etc. Same sergeant's going to track the next time they go to court, and if their charges are going to be dismissed because they're not fit to proceed, he's already calling to figure out. Once somebody doesn't have charges, they can't stay in the jail. Doesn't matter if they're doing great in this program or not. You don't have criminal charges, you can't be in jail. So he makes calls to say, hey, we've got so-and-so. They're stabilized right now. They've been up to the state hospital. They're stabilized right now. They're going to get released. Do you have a bed for them? And unfortunately, 9 times out of 10 answers. So that piece of the system is still got to get worked on. There's other areas of the public safety system that still got to get worked on. But I will tell you this, and everybody said this back in 2013 when Tom was working on this: without a functional jail, the rest of the system doesn't operate. The courts can't operate. The prosecuting attorney can't operate. The defense attorneys can't even operate. In 2012, the defense attorneys agreed. Look, they never got to meet their client. Somebody would get arrested for burglary. The courts would assign him an attorney, but they were already back out of the jail, and the attorney never met him. It got so bad, in fact, that the state said, hey, Levy County, we've noticed you're using the prison system different than other counties. When you send people to prison, you send them for 10 or 15 years. Why is that? Well, the reality is we weren't able to interrupt their criminality early on because of our revolving door. They were back out. They were still going down the same bad path. They were just getting farther down the bad path. By the time we held on to them and let them accomplish their court program, they had accumulated 8 burglaries instead of 1, and they were getting sentenced to 15 years in prison instead of maybe not going to prison at all. And so the state actually gave us some grant funding. We did a blind study program where we had property crime offenders. They would either get put in the program or treated traditionally. And the program was a parole probation officer who had a reduced workload, so they'd be paid closer attention. It prescribed 60 days in jail, which was a stabilization period, and then a high amount of interaction with the PO as they went through the process. scientifically validated that those folks did not recidivate at the same level as the district court. So we know that we have to have the system functioning to get people out of their criminality. You have to have a functional jail to do that. The levy passed in 2013, 55 cents per thousand, 50 cents for the adult jail, 5 cents for youth services. It renewed in 2017. It passed in 13 for 50 at 54% of the vote. It renewed in 17 at just under 73% of the vote. It was still 55 cents per thousand, 50 for the adult jail, 5 for the. And asking for a renewal in May, 55 cents per thousand. It's not going to increase your taxes. You're paying that tax today. It does the same thing, 50 cents for the adult jail, 5 cents for youth services, so that we can continue to do this work. There is additional work that needs to be done in our community, and anybody can see that. Anybody that looks from knows that. The county is working on a crisis stabilization center. You hear about the other things that are in the works. But folks, if this doesn't get renewed in May and we go back to what we did in 08 to 12 and we lay off these people, it's going to be bad for our community. It's going to be catastrophic for the sheriff's office. And I really need to renew this in May. So with that, well, brag real quick on Clint Riley. He's our jail commander. He got hired about 8 months after me in 1995. So we worked together as deputies and have grown up together. He is the energy behind the wellness program that I talked about. He was recognized as the jail commander of the year last year after that presentation out in Denver. And we've had jails from around the nation calling us up to talk to us about that program. And then I know I'm just a little bit long, but I have to share some I have to end on a positive.
Yeah.
This is something that in the jail, it's actually got an acronym. It's an IRF, an inmate request form, but we usually call it a kite. And folks who are in custody can send out a kite for any number of things. They could send out a kite to say, hey, can somebody give me some reading glasses? Or hey, can I see the nurse? Or hey, can I talk to so and so? Occasionally they send the sheriff a kite. And so I love to receive most of them, not all of them, but most of them. This one was a couple weeks ago. It said, thank you to all the staff for your professionalism and work each one of you do in your capacity here within the jail. The job each of you face on a daily basis is thankless, yet I see a common thread in each of you, a desire to help others. This is a quality of high esteem. May each of you find the feeling inside of your heart so you are making the world a better place. This is my last visit as a client. And I absolutely hope that that's true, that it's their last visit as a client. We do love to get to see some successes because ultimately, when you've been in this business for a while, you see a lot of folks who want it to be their last visit, and yet, you know, we actually teach new deputies in coursework now on the drug addicted brain, and we talk to them about the fact that the drug addicted brain is you're getting brand new deputy, you're going to be working with folks in here who have the drug addicted brain. Think about how the drug addicted brain works. Nobody grew up as a little kid saying, "Man, someday I hope I'm stealing my grandma's jewelry so I can buy drugs." But the drug addicted brain does that. And so I said I was going to end on positive. So we love to see some positive. We love to see some wins. All right, with that, do I have some time for questions? Okay. Right.
Thank you so much for that presentation. That was a lot of information, Sheriff Harrold. Can you just tell me quickly and tell us, how does the Eugene community work affect this process at all?
Yeah, so when I mentioned 367 beds, I took out the 15 beds that the Eugene Municipal Court contracts for. And so the 367 are beds available to local offenders for circuit court. So the sheriff is required to run a jail for the circuit courts. The city of Eugene, through their muni court, they rent 15 beds in our and they get to decide who's there. So the Eugene Municipal Court judge assigns a score. And when they get over 15, we take the lowest score and release them. They also rent beds over at Springfield Municipal Court. And again, the Eugene Municipal judges direct that. And so they might have someone in our custody for a period of time, and then they'll direct that they be transferred over to Springfield. I can't speak real specifically about the community court, but their judge would make the determination, do I use one of those 15 beds for this individual?
This isn't really a question, that just to say that a group of us are going to tour the jail Saturday morning from 8:45, starting 8:45, it's a 2-hour process. So there's room for the tour if anybody wants to come with us to see firsthand. It's a great way to inform yourself about this levy so you can make an informed decision and be able to discuss it with your friends and family.
Yeah, thank you so much for mentioning that. On your flyers is a website where there's a sign up for jail tours. I would love if everybody in Lake County came. It's your jail. I'm charged with running it, and I've got great people. I'm super proud of the people that are working in there. But it's your jail, and I would love for you to come take a look at what's actually going on. I have to admit, so I was working in there as a 21-year-old. You know, I wasn't thinking about the complexity of being responsible for their every, you know, they're in your custody. You're responsible for their every need. I wasn't thinking about that at 21. I went over there as a captain in 2015 and really got involved with the complexity of the entire operation. And I think as a community, probably we don't think very often about what goes on in that brick building. So yeah, every time I get to take folks on a jail tour, I love doing it. Because people are always pretty wowed by the level of thought and effort that goes into providing for people that are out there. When Clint Riley went to that Denver conference, one of the comments that people came up to him afterwards was, now, did you start this program because of a lawsuit? No, no, we actually started this program without a lawsuit. We didn't have to have the federal government come in and tell us that we should change things. So I am very proud of in there and working with a complex problem and good folks that are internally driven to serve the community because we don't have enough external motivators to ask them to do it.
What percentage of the people who come to the jail have a mental health diagnosis?
That's a great question. And I've heard our jail commander and our mental health specialists talk about the fact that probably in the 70% range. Incorporated in that is a diagnosis for substance abuse disorder. So there's, there's mental illness like we think of, bipolar disorder or something along those lines. There's substance abuse disorder, and then there's where they cross, which during my 30 years I've absolutely seen folks who have progressed from drug addiction disorder into the diagnosis. So yeah, there is a high need, and we also, our medical provider provides quarterly reports on their work and the cost of prescription drugs and the number of psychotropic prescription drugs prescribed. Everybody who is released from our custody is released with 7 days worth of a prescription for 7 days of their medication free of charge. If they go to the pharmacy, they get fill free of charge. Most of them don't fulfill the prescription. Unfortunately, when they're released from custody, they generally go back to self-medicating. Yeah, the prescription bill is pretty high. Frankly, a lot of the folks that are in and out of our custody get their best medical care when they're in our custody, because when they're out of our custody, they're not necessarily thinking about seeking.
And where it said in your slideshow that 78% of mental health services are funded by the jail levy.
Yes.
78% of which.
So I mentioned 52% of the overall corrections budget is funded with the levy. The levy promise back in 13 was really related to jail beds. So we spend $0 levy dollars on the sheriff's work or on electronic monitoring. 78% of the actual beds in the jail are paid for with the levy. So any of our costs that are related to that, we apply a percentage to. So our medical mental health contract, we pay 78% of the invoice with levy funds. Our food bill, we pay 78% of the food bill with levy funds because it funds 78% of the actual beds.
So if people on the Oregon Health Plan, when they're arrested and sent to jail, is the Oregon Health Plan going to pay them?
Unfortunately, no, and we're working on that and have been for a period of time. But unfortunately, currently, if you're on the Oregon Health Plan, as soon as you're taken into custody, you're kicked out. A few years ago, we actually started with our medical contract provider. They work with folks so that we get them signed up as we release them, so that at least they get back on. Prior to that, it was just up to them to know that they needed to go get back on, so that didn't happen. So we make sure to get them signed back up when they get out of our custody. The Oregon State Sheriff's Association has been lobbying for a couple of years now that people would not be removed from the Oregon Health Plan, specifically pre-trial offenders would not be removed. And I would say we feel like we're making movement, but it's a complex agreement that involves the federal government and the state government to get there. So we haven't gotten there yet, but we're still working on it and still getting updates.
When they're released from jail, then they go back on the Oregon Health Plan?
They do. We help them get signed back up on
Yeah, have you ever considered maybe looking at either Plainrose sheriffs or civilians who would be the first to interact with somebody like that person when they're signing a friendly record, and obviously there's something, yeah, they see somebody
Yeah, that's a terrific question.
Stuff coming out. I personally witnessed things like that, when somebody actually was de-escalated and then he would go, that private party had to leave. And then next thing you know, I have to do is people look at it. What would happen next? See, it was kind of, yeah, exactly. And de-escalated because somebody else came on.
Yeah.
The officer in the back.
Yeah, so a lot of people know about the Who's. I grew up as a deputy working out here, right? And you all are familiar with patchwork in city county. So I grew up as a young county deputy and I'd be on a call out here and did you see if the city would send the Who's? No, you're one door out with the city and it's a city resource. And I get that if I was a city taxpayer, I get. But as a deputy, we were always a little jealous that we didn't have access to food. Over in West Lane, they've for 3-4 years now, they've had what's called West Lane Mobile Crisis Response. It started off in their fire department. They got a grant. They have crisis response workers who are dispatched out of the fire department. It started just in the city limits of Florence. So if somebody's at the McDonald's, they're being disruptive with their behavior. Somebody calls the Florence Police Department. The crisis response worker responds first. Hey, McDonald's wants you to move along. Can I give you a ride down to Sunnyslaw Outreach Services? Could we get you some other services? They love it. City of Florence Police Department loves it. Mobile Crisis Response loves it. We were at the meeting, we're like, okay, let's get this expanded outside of the city. The really difficult dilemma is when you try to send a crisis response worker 20 miles up 36 out of Mapleton, and the situation turns dangerous, and the deputy's response time is 2 hours. And so what we do is we still work closely with them. We call up like mobile crisis response. Say, hey, we've got this situation up on Mapleton. You think you could try to call in there and maybe assess it by phone? So the crisis response worker will call up there. They might call us back and say, yeah, we talked to them. We really need to go out. Okay, so dispatchers say, we'll send a deputy. We'll meet you in Mapleton, and we'll go up there. Crisis response worker responds to Mapleton. They park the deputy. Dispatch calls them. Okay, we just cleared a deputy from Walterville. They're on their way. And the crisis response worker says, okay. And then a domestic violence dispute comes up here in Santa Clara, and that deputy gets diverted. And so we call crisis response. Okay, we had to send the deputy to a domestic violence. We're covering Lane County, the side of Connecticut, most shifts with 3 deputies. We talked about the timber revenue that used to fund a robust service. In the 70s, we had 100 deputies to cover a patrol for Lane County. Today, I've got 30 general fund deputies. Population's gone up by 130,000 people since the 60s. So that's the dilemma. Marion County has a co-responder model. We have a crisis response worker and a deputy. Actually, in Marion County, it's a multi-agency. So there's 2 Salem officers, a Woodburn officer, and 2 Marion County deputies. And they schedule so that they can cover all the days of the week. And so the Woodburn officer will go anywhere in Marion County if he's the one working with them. So they've got a pretty neat system up there. I haven't gotten people very interested in the co-responder model in the county, but unfortunately, I think to serve the unincorporated areas, not so much here. Cahoots could certainly be expanded and cover Santa Clara, just like we do in the city. But when you start getting into unincorporated county, I think we still have some work to be done to be able to do that safely. But I absolutely agree with you. Certainly, people respond differently to this outfit sometimes. I can also tell you, and I can show you pictures of deputies. I had a deputy up Round River Road who spent 5 hours holding a guy's hand as he was half in and half out of the window, trying to decide if he was going to go back to the house and kill himself or not. And instead, he stood there and held his hand, and the sergeant drove into Cottage Grove and got him a sandwich. And eventually we were able to help that individual. But if we'd had somebody who wasn't dressed like this, maybe it would have been.
Well, yeah, I know it's not an issue of compassion that you guys have for intention, but it's just the way that somebody in that state perceives.
Hey, thanks.
I really appreciate y'all. Thank you very much.